Webster board on this side?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then we've got Frederic and Siren. Siren up front, Frederic in the back. All right.
All right, Brent, so I'll open up. Do you mind if I just kind of tilt it down a little bit?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think
So
she
we are-
has it going yet,
Okay.
but where are we at? So
I
we
mean,
got
it's
4 minutes, yeah.
so.
Oh, yeah, just put your stuff over.
Oh, I'll take it, I'll take it with,
Fine.
I'll take it with me, don't worry.
I don't even know that you, I write notes out. I rarely.
I hear you, so.
No, we're just. And.
Yeah.
I thought we did that.
Hey, just so you know, we're up live on YouTube, so the microphones are very sensitive, just let you know. How are you? Seeing it earlier, but it's not about. I see Emma this one.
You guys need glasses? We didn't bring them, sorry. You got sunglasses? Yeah, there you go.
You're right in there. It's really hot. I did change.
Yeah. I was able to have
In the
See us.
Yeah, Bob. That accurate?
Yeah,
Should
looks
be.
like it's
Yeah,
working with
okay.
mine.
All right.
Good evening. It's 5:30 on behalf of the Siren, Webster, and Frederic School Boards, Josh and Kyle. I want to welcome everyone. I'm Kevin with the Siren School District. Tonight's meeting will be conducted in a committee of the whole format. As such, there will be no public comment period, and neither the boards nor the presenter will be taking questions from the public during the meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to provide information and facilitate discussion among the 3 boards regarding potential collaborative opportunities. Community members are welcome to attend and observe the discussion. Each board president will call their respective meeting to order in accordance with their district's agenda. Following the opening of each meeting, we will begin with introductions before proceeding to the formal presentation. So if you got Katie, if you would start with Siren.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
For Webster, calling our meeting to order for committee of the whole, agenda has been posted and meeting has been notified.
Board Frederic, I will call the roll order and take a roll call. Chris? Yes. Emily? Renee? April? Yes.
We're privileged tonight to have WSB Member Services Director Ben Niehaus here to give a PowerPoint on different options school districts have. And Attorney Bob Butler from the WSB is remotely here attending as well. And here's Ben Niehaus.
Okay, we're all set, huh?
You ready?
Yeah, okay, all right.
All right.
Well, thank you. I always start, I have one of those voices that booms a bit, so audience, can you hear me okay? Not too loud? I'm not gonna drive anybody out of here. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here on behalf of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. Let me explain maybe a little with the tech here. I know the main screen, there's a toolbar up on the top, which I really do not think is going to interfere with the presentation, because on the Zoom, I don't see it there, and most of my content will be below that. So if you, as boards and the audience, are okay that the WASB logo is covered a little bit, I think we're ready to proceed here. Kevin, Josh, Kyle, is there anything additional you want to share? We're good to go and move forward. Okay, just I put this, oh, I got to remember to stay here. I like to wander, so if I get wandering, anybody in the audience, say, Ben, get back to the podium. So, well, now you can't see my catchy title I have before I introduce Bob. Who is this? Who is this guy? Ben Niehaus, why is he here? So, I just have my bio from our WASB website, but a little background about me. I'm going into my 6th year with the Wisconsin Association of School Boards as its Director of Member Services. Prior to that time, I was a school superintendent for 10 years. Started in a little school district called Goodman-Armstrong Creek. Did that for 2 years. And then in my 3rd and 4th year, I was a shared superintendent between Goodman-Armstrong Creek and the school district of Florence County. So we're way up in far northeastern Wisconsin. And after 2 years of that, I became the sole administrator for the school district of Florence County. So it's interesting. I did 4 years in Goodman-Armstrong Creek. I did 8 years in the school district of Florence County, but I was only an administrator for 10 years because 2 overlapped. So that might be a little bit of fuzzy math, if you will. But I'm originally from Crandon. I still work from a home office in northern Wisconsin. I'm kind of a north branch of the WASB. I do make it down to our Madison office, and instead of taking Highway 70 or 8 across, I was downstate in Beloit and Parkview and worked my way back, and that's how it goes. Before I introduce our Associate Executive Director and Staff Counsel, Bob Butler, just a little background. I am familiar with shared services, tuition agreements. During my time at the school district of Florence County with 4 surrounding school districts, we had 13 shared service agreements at one time. Most of them, the school district of Florence County was the fiscal agent for most of those. Some of them have subsided. We'll talk a little bit about what some of the challenges are in that. But in addition to that, I also served, I was president of the Wisconsin Rural School Alliance, but I also was on the shared service task force that Speaker Voss created back in 2022. And there was myself and several administrators, along with a bipartisan group of Assembly and Senate representatives that met to talk about shared services among schools. It also got into consolidation, which we are going to touch on a little bit tonight. So I'm not an expert in this, and I'm going to, I've got experiences and enough that I hope that this evening is educational and informative for each of the 3 boards and for you as a public. Board administrators, during this, if you think there's anything you need to interject, please do so. it might be better to do it at that point versus at the end and you forget your thoughts or whatever. So just interrupt me. Also joining us this evening are our Associate Executive Director and Staff Counsel, Mr. Bob Butler. Bob, you can still hear us loud and clear and everything?
I hear you quite well, Ben.
Okay, great. So Bob is on that if there are some questions that might directly reference state statute, anything like that. And Bob's done a lot of presentations from the legal perspective on some of these issues. So we have him there and we'll see where this all goes this evening. Again, really, there's a lot here and I'm going to put the agenda up of what we're going to cover.
Hey, Ben, if I could just interject for one moment on this,
Absolutely.
just so everybody gets the big picture here. So as an association, we share information on this and then work with local school districts to get them going to where they want to go. Neither Ben nor I are here endorsing a particular route for any of the three districts to take. So that we believe in local control and the three districts coming together and you deciding your level of engagement that you have with each other. So if while we're answering questions, if we talk about intergovernmental agreements or tuition agreements or consolidation or something, that is not done with a bias toward having any of two or three of the districts engage in that with each other or with some other district. Just wanted to put that big disclaimer out there, Ben, right from the get-go.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. And as Bob shared, we want to support, provide information so our members, our school boards can make informed decisions, but we do not tell our members what to do. We don't advise. So if there's questions tonight of Ben and Bob, do you think we should do this? We're going to be like, that's not our decision, that's yours. So thanks for that, Bob. There will be a slide or two, and I do want to affront that from some of my experience, particularly with shared service agreements, it may come across a little bit as, boy, there's a lot of challenges. Is Ben trying to say, don't do that? As Bob said, no. Just trying to make you aware of things that have to be considered. There are so many moving parts in each and every one of these components. And with that, looking at the agenda, what we're going to do is go through what is called whole grade sharing, define what that is, tuition agreements, open enrollment. We will reference a bit with part-time open enrollment, what are shared service agreements, and we'll touch on, it's not where things are, but what is consolidation, what is dissolution, and who is this thing called the School Boundary Appeals Board. There sometimes can be some misunderstandings because we don't see these things a lot. They're becoming a little more prevalent in conversation. Some of you may be aware, two districts south of here, Loyal and Greenwood, are going to a binding referendum this November to decide whether they are going to consolidate or not. There is a school district right now that is considering dissolution. There's some things active right now, so where exactly they are in that process, we're not exactly sure. I mean, they've filed some things with dissolution. It's the Hoostisford School District. So these things are out there, so we want to just provide a little bit of an overview of what they are. So let's start with whole grade sharing. So whole grade sharing, and I'm curious, those of you in the back, can you read the slide enough from where you're at? Okay, yeah, okay. So, whole grade sharing, I'll just try to summarize this. I know most of you can read it, is simply as this slide states, it's two or more districts that are deciding to share a substantial part of a grade with another. I'll just give you a quick example. If District A and District B want to enter into a whole grade sharing agreement, and District A says we can educate all of the third grade students, District B would send its students to District A. In return, District A may say, we expect you to maybe educate all of our fourth grade students. So all the fourth grade students from District A go to District B. It's a situation where districts that are relatively close geographically, that are challenged with staffing and small class sizes, can consider this option. Before I get a little bit more into it, it originated from Iowa. There are, and as you can see, it began in the late 80s. There's about 14 districts of the 300 in Iowa are implementing this. There's 40 districts that are receiving or sending students in some direction, at least one way. So it's not overwhelming in Iowa, but that's where it originated from. There is a map. I'm not going to put it up, but if this is shared out later, the hyperlinks would take you to that so you could kind of see, but it's pretty self-explanatory. It would be like any of these three districts are bordering each other, potentially sharing grades between with still keeping your school district and your identity. This was put in the 15-17 Budget Act. To our knowledge, and I think DPI would confirm this, we are not aware of any districts that have taken advantage or are utilizing this. There's some that have considered. We do have situations where, similar to Iowa, there may be programming going one way. I know in the districts I was in, at one time we were picking Spanish up from the Florence County School District when I was in Goodman. When I was in Florence, our advanced welding students were going to Niagara because we were no longer offering that. But the whole grade sharing probably has its intentions at the elementary where you're talking about your undifferentiated curriculum, your 4K through grade 6, or however, maybe even through grade 8, where your big core areas. You're looking at sharing and exchanging those grades to address staffing challenges, addressing student needs, and obviously the financial constraints that the boards likely have before them. Bob, if there's anything too that you want to expound on, just obviously jump in on any of these.
Will do.
The only maybe part of why we're not seeing more whole grade sharing, there's really only one financial incentive at the current time with that. And basically what that is the participating districts would qualify for something called special adjustment aid. There's no new revenue provided at this time through a whole grade sharing agreement. But what special adjustment aid does is it acts as a parachute that says if those districts that are participating in whole grade sharing, the way the school funding formula works, if your general state aids were to decrease by more than 15%, the state cannot take more than that away. It puts a stop loss in the amount of state aid that can be decreased based upon what the cost sharing implications are in what is a very complicated school funding formula that I'm just not going to take time to get into, but there is no new revenue for you as boards to whole grade share. If anything, the incentive is looked upon by some as the incentive is to reduce costs if you can figure things out to make it work. But the state is going to hold you harmless and guarantee that your general state aids are not going to decrease by more than 15% in any given year. So that's the only true financial implications on whole grade sharing from a state funding perspective, if you will.
Will there be a specific time for us to ask questions, or how
Just-
does that?
You can go ahead and interject right now if you'd like. So or you could wait to the end. Otherwise, if you have a question on the topic right now, it might be better just to do it right now.
There was a lot of press initially on whole grade sharing and about the $2,000 per student or whatever. I don't think people understand that didn't get into the budget.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the question was that there's initially when whole grade sharing came out, that there was conversation about there being a $2,000 funding initiative. And I'll be honest, I just don't even remember that detail. But what I can share, anything that was offered and shared as a potential financial incentive more than the special adjustment aid never made it at any point in time. There has been nothing. So that's, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that percolated this past fall in the legislature. But to your question about whether was there ever a $2,000 incentive per student or any incentive? There was not. There has never been an incentive other than the parachute of guaranteeing boards would not see more than a 15% decrease in their general aids. That's it.
And there could be some reference there to the legislature passed a state budget that would have included bump ups in some of these aid items and the
Okay.
incentives for consolidation, but that was vetoed by the governor, at the time, Governor Walker.
Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Like last summer when I was looking into it.
I'll touch on that a little bit further.
That maybe that whole grade sharing was more in the elementary because of the uniform curriculum styles.
Likely.
But my perspective looking at that, then once you've lost students at lower grades to a different school, the likelihood of them coming back is less. And at the high school, there's more of an opportunity to offer a wider range of programs in some schools than others. So I'm seeing those as more, the high school as a better option, actually.
Yeah, and it is applicable to the high school. I think you're hitting on one of probably what are several considerations before boards of what are the pros and cons that have to be weighed. So that's one that I've heard before and we've expressed as a potential challenge with whole grade sharing, even with the benefits of it. So it's a recognizable matter for sure.
Doing this yet, so this is like blazing
Yep.
the trail.
Yeah.
So I do think there are a lot of questions based on the information that's been out there and on the DPI website, which
Yeah.
I had printed off earlier, and just making sure that we're very clear about.
Yeah, so again, it went in nearly a decade ago, and we're as close to 100% certain nobody is doing this, and I think you'd hear the same thing from the Department of Public Education. If you proceed with a whole grade sharing agreement, state law does have some specific requirements. I've outlined those in number 2. It's the term of the agreement, the grade levels that are affected. The per pupil amount, I'm going to expound on that just a little bit. Which school board is awarding graduation diplomas? And I'm reading these because I know those in the back may not be able to see them. I got to stay by this mic. School boards required to which school board is going to maintain the pupil records? Which school board is responsible for providing transportation for students with IEPs? IEPs are individualized education plans for our special needs students. Under federal law, each of those students has what's called an IEP. And based upon what's in that IEP, that student's services need to be met. So in those cases, if there's whole grade sharing of special needs students, transportation is something that is going to have to be addressed and worked upon between the two districts. And that leads into bullet point G of which district is responsible for transporting those students with an IEP. The students with disabilities, and I'll say this as it pertains to tuition with whole grade sharing, there are some unknowns on this because nobody is doing it. So for you as boards and administrators, if this is something you consider, you're going to have to reach out to DPI and their finance department, because what there is they did start an indexing. They set a floor of $12,000 per pupil for students with an IEP, and it began increasing in fiscal year 8. Bob, I'm not looking to put you on the spot, but from anything I can tell, it's tied to indexing with open enrollment, but that doesn't mean it's exactly the same from what I've seen. But again, you're going to have to work with DPI in that if this is something one or more of you decide to consider and move on in the near future. If a student is open enrolled, that open enrollment is held in abeyance, meaning it's put on hold. If that student is in a grade level or a program, if he or she is open enrolled to the district, that may be taking them on through a whole grade sharing agreement. And the pupils continue to be counted in the same by the resident school district. Now, the thing with the whole grade sharing agreement is resolutions have to be passed by the board by February 15th of the tail end of the school year proceeding when the whole grade sharing agreement begins. So to put that simply, it's too late to do a whole grade sharing agreement for this coming school year. And those agreements have to be considered at least 60 days prior to them formally adopted. So these are things that you have to take care of definitely no later than the mid part of December, but your conversations, as you all know, as boards, they start before that time. So I would think it's likely that if you're going to consider whole grade sharing, those conversations for the 27-28 school year should probably be starting sooner than later because you have to look at things with the staffing, budgeting, students, and facilities. I think that's one of the things where what's on paper looks like it could work, but do you actually have the capacity in a physical classroom to put students in depending upon what those numbers are? There are some resources, as the one board member already referred to. There's a lot of resources on the Department of Public Instruction's website, and I will comment a little bit to the comments made or the question asked about where are things legislatively with this a little bit later in this presentation. So again, this PowerPoint, if shared out, and I believe if you even save it in Kevin, Josh, and Kyle, if you guys need help with the PDF and getting the hyperlinks to work, let me know. I can send that if you're wanting to like take this website or this PowerPoint and get it out so that the links are accessible.
One other thing.
Sure.
According to the DPI website, I just want the people in attendance to know that the school board must hold a public hearing at least 30 days prior to entering into an agreement. So this isn't something we do without the public's input and information and ability to talk towards. There's also a citizen petition process that can go on. So if you want more or further information than you know and are hearing, it is on the DPI website, some of the other things, and it's under the WGS timeline of the February 15th. So there's some bullet points after that on DPI that help explain that.
Yeah, and if any of you want to find this information, the DPI website works very well. You can just Google, it's dpi.state.wi.us, but if you just Google Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction or Wisconsin DPI, go to their search and put in whole grade sharing, it's going to take you likely to all these links and the information that's being referenced by the board member here. So a lot of information out there. So with that, any
Ben,
further
before
questions?
you leave that, if I could just add
Yeah.
two things. One is for whatever reason, the camera on your end isn't working, so I don't see anything other than the Siren logo, just so you know that.
Oh,
So I'm sorry I can't actually see the individual
okay.
board members or
Wonder-
administrators. But what I was going to say in response to the board member's comment, which is very appropriate on that and is accurate, in addition to that, either the district on its own initiative or the citizens via a petition can have a feasibility study done. And so Ben is accurate that we haven't had anyone do a whole grade sharing agreement in the state. We have had some districts do feasibility studies, and they looked at it for all or part of specific high school grade levels. And the reason behind that is Wisconsin, and Ben will get to this later on the consolidation discussion. Wisconsin has a law that allows a K-8 structured school district. So nearest to you folks would be Lakeland Union High School and the K-8s underneath it. You could go from a K-8 Union High School to a K-12, but you can't go from a K-12 to create K-8s and a Union High School. But you can kind of get there by default through a whole grade sharing arrangement. So some of the districts who've been looking at whole grade sharing arrangements and they haven't executed these yet, were thinking of having that where they would go into that process and through whole grade sharing have District A and B run the elementary grade levels and District C would run the high school. And that would be their default way of doing it. And again, it could be something even beyond a whole grade. It could be particular courses, tech ed. You could have a specific tech ed course, and certain grades go to a particular school through whole grade sharing. But as Ben gets into tuition agreements and intergovernmental agreements, many districts have gone that route instead because it frankly is a little bit less cumbersome.
Thanks, Bob. And with that, we will go into, and I want to move that bar, but I'm afraid I'm going to screw something up. So all you're not seeing there is it says tuition agreement. Some of you may see it on the screen there. So as Bob referred to, what is a tuition agreement? As Bob said, you can do your own whole grade sharing agreement, if you will, but you're going to call it a tuition agreement. And it's going to have some different statutory provisions of what that looks like. And these have existed well before whole grade sharing existed. So tuition agreements are nothing new, and it's pretty much, it's, as the goal said there, it's basically determining instructional services that are provided by another district for a district that isn't offering something. So my first experience with it was being in a little tiny district like Goodman Armstrong Creek. We had 2 or 3 students that wanted a foreign language, whether it was their interest preparing for post-secondary. We did not have it. So we were able to purchase that from the school district of Florence County, come to a tuition agreement to pay Florence County. And that, at that time, that was pre-COVID, we did have the technology to video the classroom from Florence and the instructor down into a classroom at Goodman. And that instructor would come down like once or twice a year or a little more also. So that's what a tuition agreement is. Okay, just coming through, Lisa. So statute here for a tuition agreement. I am not going to get into all the details of how tuition can be determined, but there's 3 methods. There's a standard or statutory tuition. Basically, it's somewhat of an algebraic formula that you'll probably work with DPI on if you want to pursue that. There's a method called the base transfer plus, which has implications with the current determined tuition with open enrollment. And method 3, which is what I was most familiar with, is the 2 districts work together to determine what the actual cost is. That's going to create, if you will, the win-win, not just for the students, but okay, what's going to work best to cover costs for the district providing and the district that is sending the student or students to the other district? What is going to be that expense in your budget? Yeah, Kevin?
So Ben, just a quick question. You talked about doing it through technology instead of having somebody have windshield time on that. So your actual cost, did you have a negotiated rate that you could go lower because you had technology rather than paying a staff member to drive? Or
I would say yes. I can't remember the detail, but likely because there were, to your question, there was no mileage implications. There was no travel time for the staff member. We had a support person that was in the room with the kids at Goodman Armstrong Creek and that, but that dollar amount would have been more if we had to have the students move or the teacher move for sure. So the actual cost, and Bob, I don't know if you have any experience, if that's what you see more often or not, but there are.
No, I've
those
seen the
Okay.
standard tuition almost
Oh, okay.
universally
Okay.
being the amount.
Okay.
It's just so difficult to determine the actual cost because even if you could go on the educator, those are done more in an intergovernmental agreement approach. And with that, Ben will get to in a bit, the shared services, because the staff persons can change and therefore the cost changes.
So there's those 3 methods if you enter into a tuition agreement, which you don't have timelines like the February 15th requirement that you would have with the whole grade sharing. As you can see in number 2, and I think this one I'm just going to read to make sure I get it right. There's a specific estimate of the amount of state aid, if any, to be received by the enrolling district the following year and paid to the resident district as a transitive aid. If the actual aid received is greater than the estimate, the enrolling district retains the difference. So that's what you have to process a bit, but that's finance managers will be on that. And we'll have to keep tabs on that to make sure the transitive aids is done correctly by statute and is accurate. Okay, any question, tuition agreements? Pretty straightforward on that. Open enrollment's been around for quite some time. I would assume these districts have open enrollees moving between them. Probably most districts at least have one or more that are going out or coming in, and that's my experience from my time and knowing what many of my former colleagues and neighbors and districts were dealing with. So basically allows a parent to apply for their student to leave from the resident district and go attend courses at the non-resident district, basically becoming a pupil of the non-resident district. I have the application dates for this past year up there. They're always going to be very similar. Bob, I don't know if they always ended on April 30th and the front one might move a day or two, but it's pretty much February, March, and April is when the application windows open. I think that start date can vary between February 1st and 3rd, depending on when Saturdays and Sundays and Mondays and all those things fall. Applications, can they be denied? Both the non-resident resident district have matters that they can consider in denying open enrollment applications. And as you as boards know, you're probably in the midst of determining, or you already did that before the application period, of what your seat availability was for open enrollees. The biggie on this one is the transportation is the responsibility of the parents. The school districts are not responsible, with exception to students that may have an IEP. Bob, am I correct in that?
That is correct, right?
Okay. These are the tuition amounts, just to show you going back a few years to what we are estimating. DPI has not established these, but you can see regular education students are the lower amount. Special needs children that have an IEP is going to be a higher dollar amount. And these amounts, it's pretty consistent. They go up like clockwork each year of what the revenue is that the resident school district has to pay to the non-resident for that non-resident student or district to take the student from the other district. So open enrollment has been around. Bob, when did open enrollment start? Maybe back in the early 90s, or
Oh, it's been around, yeah, for
it's been
20
around a
long
long time.
years.
So
Yeah.
it's nothing new, nothing new.
I think the only thing
Um,
that's come up really on this one, Ben, for that's relevant to the districts is some districts have agreements to allow the non-resident district to come in and pick up students in the resident district. And it's kind of a de facto shared services tuition agreement, whole grade sharing that also happens in some jurisdictions. Not that common, but it does occur.
yeah, but the resident district has to give permission for the non-resident
Correct.
to
Right.
come
They
in.
have
You
to
can't
adopt a
just,
resolution to approve it.
yeah, you just can't assume taking your bus and crossing the lines to pick the student up. So yeah, you have to have that resolution, as Bob said. One of the things, and you're not seeing it here, I have WIA eligibility on here. Open enrollment and what are called tuition waivers are they are going to have WIA eligibility implications. So that's a whole nother conversation in and of itself. And Kyle, not to put you on the spot, but you're on the WIA board. I know Corey's out in the audience. He's on that. Administrators and you as boards are probably quite familiar with, the WIA is going to look at this to make sure that students aren't moving to go play at a competitive team or build power teams and things like that. So there's going to be implications with WIA and open enrollment. Now, there is what is called partial open enrollment. This started back in 2018-19, and this basically allows a student to stay in their resident district, but they can go and take up to 2 courses at any public school at any other non-resident school district. And under that, I'm going to advance this here. There is a course fee that is determined by statute, and I think that's one too, where they're going to take the hours of instruction for the particular course and divide it by a formula that they have in statute, which I think is the base number of hours that are provided in instruction in that school. And again, parents, guardians are typically responsible for the transportation. Part-time open enrollment will not have an impact WIA eligibility. What it's looking to do is provide new expanded opportunities for students to maybe go to a non-resident district to pick up a course that their resident district does not have, but it's a maximum of 2 courses. Yeah.
Students that are being homeschooled and their ability to enroll through a district.
So we were dealing with that one this week. So, Bob, do you want me to attempt? The question was, how does that apply for students that are homeschooled and looking, because homeschooled students can take up to 2 courses in any public school. But I think that whole issue is much more complicated of the homeschool can take 2 courses. No, they can at any school. They can go any school in the state, they can take up to 2 courses. Now, there's some statutory provisions on what authority boards have to accept, deny in those, but homeschooled students, Bob, I don't believe are subject to they can't participate directly in part-time open enrollment, but in a way they can work around it because they are entitled to take up to 2 courses
Right,
in
per
any
semester, per
per
semester.
semester.
That is correct. Yeah, they have a different statute. There's a specific statute, 11853, that allows them to attend up to 2 courses in the school district. So that's totally separate from the part-time open enrollment that applies to a non-resident, because the homeschool student is a resident of the school district.
But if they were seeking to go to 2 classes in a non-resident district, would there be a fee that the resident district would have to pay to do that? Or would they just not be eligible to take a class in a non-resident district?
No, they can take the classes, but if they're homeschooled, Bob, there's not going to be any fees or revenue billing situations, correct?
Not for their resident district. I mean, because in that spot, they're able to attend tuition free. They might have fees if you have fees for the full-time enrolled regular resident, but otherwise they come in. There has to be space in the classroom. They have to meet the admission requirements that you have for it. So they have to, if it's a high school course and it's math, let's say, they have to have the prerequisites or proof of that to come in. But totally different process because there's no sharing between districts. This is just your resident student who's homeschooled has the access to the courses, and they also have access to the extracurriculars as well.
I think the fair way to summarize it, you can't bill the homeschooled family outside of fees for the course. You can't bill them tuition.
Correct. Right. Just like they're the same as if they were enrolled
Okay.
full-time.
So Bob, the question is, what about if the resident homeschool student goes to any other non-resident, the non-resident still can't bill the homeschooled student, correct?
Right. They're not able to
Yeah,
bill. Well, they can't enter into a tuition agreement with them unless the school district, the resident district's a part of it. And they can't, if they're denying space for non-residents who are not homeschooled, they can't allow the homeschooler in who's a non-resident.
right, that's a provision. So it's one, Bob, would it be fair to say in these situations, boards are going to have to work through their policy and likely refer to their legal counsel exactly how to deal with these unique situations that arise? That's probably
Yeah, the
advice
homeschool
we could
ones
give.
they have more intricacies because it's even if the student had the statutory ability to be there, there's still a subjective application by the administration to say, does the student hit the minimum standards for admission to that specific course? So I couldn't automatically jump, let's say it was a ninth grader and I wanted to jump into a higher level math, and I was a ninth grader who was homeschooled, the administration at the school district still has the ability to say, no, the student either does or does not meet the standards for admission into that higher level math course.
Yeah, so a good example, if the homeschool student showed proof they had algebra, but the local policy to take trigonometry was completion of algebra, advanced algebra, and geometry, they can't just come in and say, well, I'm taking trigonometry regardless of what you as the school district say. That would
Right.
be an example. Yeah. So there is some control and not everything's an absolute, but yeah, complicated situations, and I think that's part of it. None of this, there's always a lot of different moving pieces on each of these. It's more involved than it looks so often just in a simple statute and what your local policy provisions are and what the statute's implications are in this. So okay, moving on to shared service agreements. So shared service agreements are under Wisconsin statute 660301. That's one of the statutes that superintendents, finance managers become quite familiar with because as I understand, your IT director between Siren and Frederic is under a 660301 agreement, a shared service agreement. Typically, you see shared service agreements for sharing staff and transportation. That's primarily where you will see these. And oh, I've got that as the second bullet. And extracurriculars, if you're getting into cooperative agreements, sharing coaches, things of those nature. This slide here, and it's titled Things to Consider. Again, I know the toolbar is blocking it. This is the slide I was referring to and going back to Bob's opening comments. This is not to create a bias that 660301 agreements can't work, don't work. There are challenges of, I would say, what looks good and works on paper can have its challenges in practice. Other times it works very well. I know going back to my former district, the IT director for Goodman Armstrong Creek, Leona, and Walbino, he's been doing that probably closer to 25 years as a shared IT director for those three districts, similar to you have the share between Frederic and Siren. There are things you really need to consider and look at and talk with the involved staff about. And I've broken this down into logistics, this thing called geography. What are those mileage costs? And this part of the state and most of Wisconsin, we're going to be dealing with inclement weather at time lost in instructional service. Depending upon the geographic area, we had somebody that was providing special needs that after 2 years just said, I can't do this. I'm getting on the road at 6 in the morning. I'm getting home at 6, 7 at night. It's taking away family time because that person was providing the instructional time, but we had a 5-district shared service agreement. And at times that staff person was driving from their resident district in Niagara all the way to the Leona School District, was closer to 60 miles one way. It just wasn't sustainable. So I'm bringing these things up is just to really consider and talk them through. They can work, they do work, but there are other things too that sometimes are beyond your control as board or administration. Another one I can think of is starting a family, and that individual that we were sharing for a couple of years eventually said, I want to come back home. I can't do this because of the time and travel, and I have a young family. I'm just giving you a few examples of all the things that need to be considered. Schedules, kind of alluding to that. You know, and the responsibility, I guess I've alluded to both professionally and personally. It can make for very long days. And one of the things you have to have some flex in this, particularly if you are sharing in the special needs area and you have IEPs that have schedules and scheduled IEP meetings. And what happens if the inclement weather factors in? You got to reschedule that IEP. It could bump an IEP meeting at this district, that district, whatever it may be. So I share all of this not to deter or say you should not consider and have these conversations as you already are, but there are things that you clearly want to discuss and talk about with all parties involved to try to make it so it is sustainable and does work. Yeah, yep, got a question coming here.
add to that, that our low incidence providers already do that a ton.
Okay.
I mean, there are people that are like physical therapy, they can be from here to Menominee doing those, and then they're attending meetings virtually. So like you said, it's difficult and it's time consuming, but it definitely can be done.
Oh, yeah, absolutely it can. Yeah. Yeah, we had 13 at one time. We were doing driver's ed, occupational therapy, speech and language, director of pupil services, food service. We were sharing a food service director between Niagara and Florence. So it can be done. And some of them are still there. I know that, but they have lost a few. Or you get the person that's in one of those roles, is going well, and he or she decides to go to a different district. You post a position as a dual role. Somebody might say, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in serving your district, but I'm not going to do two. So that puts you as boards in a position of, well, we got to take care of number one first. That's the reality. And I went through those situations, and my board went through them we have to bring that person home, even though we want to make this work. Those things come up. So they can work, but there are challenges. They're just not as easy as what the paper would show. This slide talks about athletic cooperatives. And again, a lot of this is going to be dictated by getting conference approval and working with the WIAA. There's a series of dates that the WIA requires if you're going to apply for cooperative team agreements, which could lead to cooperative coaching and things. So don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I'm not very well versed on all these WIAA things, but just to be aware, anytime a board, the administration take action in these, you got to really think about everything, all the implications that could come up. You could figure this out. Again, going back to like open enrollment, tuition agreements, but what are the implications upon the student athlete? So you have to look at things like that. Yep. Yeah.
The dates and the deadlines and it taking the process to go through to do those co-ops, that is only to allow eligibility for actual state tournaments. If a conference would approve a co-op, it could start right away, but then that team would not qualify for a state tournament.
99% sure that's correct. And I see Kyle and Corey. Corey's giving me a thumbs up out there. So Corey Hinkle from Luck. Corey, not meaning to put you on the spot, but he's been WIA board president, and Kyle's on the WIA board. So thank you for affirming that, gentlemen. Okay, let's just touch base on consolidation and dissolution. Something we maybe don't want to talk about, but I was asked to speak a bit about this. So outside of the Milwaukee public school system, any school district of the other 420, two or more, may consider consolidating into one district or even passing a resolution to dissolve the school district. Bob typically does these presentations. The slide you see where I have background, the procedural process, assets, liabilities, finance operations, and other legal implications is a presentation in and of itself, but I am going to highlight a little bit on each of these, just enough, and to see if you as a board administrators have any questions that we might be able to clear up if you do have those. The first thing is, and again, title's blocked, it says consolidation feasibility study. This is a two-step process. So initially, if you're really getting into looking at consolidation, there are entities out there, financial advisor entities in the public sector, if you will, that can do revenue and expenditure projections of the individual districts and the two or more districts and how it may look if you do become a consolidated school district. So those entities can do that. I will get to what the costs or rough costs of that is and what is happening at the legislative level with that. The timeline at the bottom, it takes approximately 2 months for an analysis, and it's probably going to take another 6 months for you as boards to communicate that out to your public, of what that looks like and the processes. So that conversation alone, let's just say you're closer to a year than anything and just doing a feasibility study. Bob, Loyal and Greenwood, and I'm not trying to put Loyal and Greenwood on the spot, but I've presented there and they've testified down at the legislature, and it's very well known, as I shared, they are going to binding referendum. They've been going through this back and forth for several decades, and the most recent referendum that's being considered this November, I think they've been working on it for probably closer to 3 years now, all of 2 years. So it's not a process that just happens overnight that, well, let's think about consolidation, see if we can make it happen for next July 1st. And actually, the statutes have 3 timelines that you have to adhere and follow to make that happen. So step 1 is really doing a feasibility study. And again, I'll get to what costs and things could be on that. So I already talked about 2 or more districts may initiate consolidation. And there's a notification process. And Bob has lots of content on this that he shares when he goes out to districts that may be further along in the process of needing to be better educated of all the implications. Yes.
Feasibility studies, are they public record?
Yes.
Where do you find them?
You mean for ones that have already been completed? Yeah, they're going to be a public record for sure. What you probably want to do is, like, I don't want to put Loyal or Greenwood on the spot, but I'm sure they're probably out there on a public facing web page. Yeah, and see what you hit. So, but there's
Ben, along
definitely,
those
Yep.
lines, you've got them at the end of this, and Ben has examples of districts that recently went through consolidation and the studies on it, but there's also a resource from the legislature that goes through all of the consolidations that have happened. And you can get the consolidation orders and both the resolutions to consider consolidation, to initiate the process, and the actual orders of consolidation there.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I think if any of you want to go out and Google consolidations, and I'll put a few districts up that recently consolidated, the shared service legislative task force that I participated in, you actually, if you would go out, and I could email Kevin, Kyle, and Josh on this, is if you probably Google 2022 Legislative Shared Service Task Force, there were consolidated districts that have consolidated testified and shared how they did it, what went through. There's a lot of reports that were summarized and put together after about 10 months of us meeting every few months in that. So there's going to be a lot of information out there. It's all public record.
Thank you.
Yep.
Initiation, bringing districts together, and when that, I received some questions from the public about our district potentially going multiple directions. And I just want to understand if that has happened or has not happened in the past. Yeah, like District A would split and some would go to B and some would go to C, and District A would not exist anymore. But in all the cases that have come forward before, an entire district has gone with one or more other districts.
Yeah, so Herman, Neosho, Rubik, Bob, I know you can't see this. I fast forwarded my slides.
I can see it. Yeah, so the honor school district, Herman Neosho Rubicon, in that case, the Herman building had issues preceding consolidation. So I believe the question is, that building no longer exists.
Not
And so,
But and to your point though, that was 3 districts.
yeah,
They're
3 K8s,
Yeah.
all in the Hartford system.
Some this way, some that way, some geographically putting students as close to the nearest district.
Yeah, so Bob, and I don't know if you can hear the board member that's asking the question, but basically I think what you're getting at is it does not have to just be the 2 districts. If everybody's agreeing that you have a district that's in the center that's surrounded by 4 districts, and you wanted to take the northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest corners, and all those districts agreed that,
Then you would redraw completely, and that just hasn't happened before, is that correct?
I don't know, and I can't answer that.
Well, they should. And then.
Yeah,
Well, for consolidation, the consolidating districts, there's some restrictions on them they would consolidate. So you can't build a building and then go through dissolution, for example. But otherwise, you could consolidate and you could have an agreement to keep a particular district building open for 5 years or an educational program running for 5 years. But consolidation is different from dissolution that Ben has some slides on. So in consolidation, the districts consolidating control their own destiny. No one can, the only time you can be forced to quote unquote consolidate is if you didn't run grades for 2 years. And then DPI will step in. But that never has really been enforced. We did have not whole grade sharing, tuition agreements with a school district called the Platte School District that no longer exists. This is in the late 1980s. They didn't run grades for a year, and then they merged in with one of the Hartford area K-8s.
but yeah, I think your question is getting, in a way, getting more to the dissolution, but as Bob said,
State come in and say, we're gonna divide your district up into 4 different chunks and give it away
That-
to.
if it can't be determined locally, eventually that's what'll happen.
Yeah, but it won't, that only happens if the districts don't operate grades. There's no other way DPI can do it. Property owners can detach their property from a school district and petition to join a neighbor. It has to be someone contiguous. So it could either be a small parcel, and there's a different process for small parcels than there are for large. But that's initiated by the homeowners, property owners, not by the state. Otherwise, where the section that Ben's in right now, this is just taking your intergovernmental agreements, your whole grade sharing to the higher level, because now District A and B decide to consolidate. They no longer exist, but a new District C is created, and all the assets and liabilities of A and B now become the assets and liabilities of District C and the employees.
And I think good questions, and that's where it gets to be so many moving parts in all this. But Bob, did he answer your question? I think let me get to the dissolution piece, because as Bob said, the consolidation is going to be controlled locally. If 2 or more districts decide to pursue that and cannot come to an agreement of what that's going to look like, then you're potentially getting to a dissolution, which when I said the state will come in, Bob, you're referencing the part where if they don't offer a grade for 2 or more years, DPI could come in and
Correct.
force the hand.
Right.
But
Right.
if the districts move to dissolution in a sense takes all the local control away. And an entity called the School District Boundary Appeals Board is going to come in, and they are going to determine the property lines for the new school district. And I'll get to that in just a bit here.
Yeah, so
Real
Ben,
quick,
I'll just add I'll just put a bow
Sure.
on this. So the only way really that the state's going to come in, and separate from hearing the petitions of landowners, property owners wanting to exit, is if you did not offer grades. So when Ben was talking about those tuition agreements, District A couldn't say to District B, educate our students for 3 years through a tuition agreement with all of our grades going there. Because if they did that, then DPI would be compelled to come in and say, you're not offering grades anymore. We're going to go through a state-initiated dissolution process. That has not happened. So and you can pause or reset that time frame by doing a whole grade sharing. But that's really at the level of weed kind of what if kind of contemplation as to what happens. A lot of things have to happen before you get to that point.
Thanks, Bob. We'll go back just real quick, and I'm not going to go through all these. So there's 3 timelines that are set by statute. If you do pursue consolidation, there's a 12-month timeline. We have some fictitious dates there, and we don't have to spend time in this. There's an 18-month, which is actually the process Loyal and Greenwood are going through. And then there's a 13-month timeline. So again, way out there if you even ever get there, but there are a lot of provisions in statute that are going to dictate the timelines that you have to follow of these 3 that you would have local choice among the 2 or more districts that might consider this, of which of the 3 timelines works the best for you and those implications there. This I'm just going to go through real quick because Bob would talk a lot more in detail about consolidation, assets, liabilities. Once consolidated, everything that is in the checkbooks or in the inventory, whatever it may be, all becomes of the new consolidated school district. And again, we would expound more on this. But just to let you know, that's a big part of what has to be addressed. Financial implications, let's cover that a little bit. The current incentive for consolidation, and this is what this came up in the shared service legislative study. And again, I'm getting ahead, but I'll show you something of what was proposed in the last legislative session that did not happen. But presently, if 2 or more districts consolidate, the state will provide $150 per pupil for the newly consolidated district. You got to look at everything from the logistics of, are there modifications to buildings? You're looking at all new athletic uniforms, if you will. There is so many pieces that go into it. The state tries to provide some incentive with this. What the state knows and is hearing, and we're hearing, is 150 per pupil. And it goes for the first 4 years, is pretty de minimis with what the actual costs of consolidation are. And then in year 5, that goes down to 50% of that. So it goes to $75 per student. And in year 6, it goes to 25%. So it's a whopping $37.50. That's the only incentive that there is right now that's offered by the state to try to help offset costs. Bob, I believe that was a higher dollar amount at one time, but why it went to a lower dollar amount is beyond me, because some of the districts that did consolidate even earlier in the 2000s did have a higher incentive than what this is. I believe
Yeah,
I'm-
it's bounced around
It's,
as the legislature has either tried to enhance it or said there are enough other enhancements. And there were enhancements in the 2015, 2017 state budget that were vetoed.
yeah. This slide is just saying that to determine the pupil count, they would use the 3-year rolling average of the districts consolidating. That wasn't the right word. And if you're qualifying for sparsity, there's kind of a stop loss that you cannot lose more than 50% of the combined sparsity aid between the consolidated school districts. So there's kind of a floor put in on that piece. Now, real quick, and this says on it, I'll read it, consolidation aid proposals in the 2025 legislative session. Just want to touch on this real quick. This is probably as close to any action happening in recent times with increasing incentives for consolidation, whole grade sharing, and feasibility studies. The first legislative bill here would have increased the aid in the first year to $1,500 and kept it as high as $650 in the second year, before then taking it back down to the 150 and then the decreasing 50 and 25%. It would have, a different bill, this LRB 2828, would have given up to $25,000 for feasibility studies for districts to explore consolidation. Ballpark feasibility study cost is probably going to be about $8,000 to $10,000 per district. So that's a significant chunk of money. There's a lot of appetite for this, but I would say that there's some things that came up in the assembly testimony that when these bills went to the Senate didn't touch them. So they never even came close to getting to the governor's desk. And I'll just leave that at that. If you want to hear more about it, I'm happy to stay after. Legislative Reference Bureau Bill 5399 would have provided up to $500 per student for the whole grade sharing. So it would have actually provided a meaningful incentive. That didn't go through, didn't get through the Senate, and they didn't take it up. And then this one, the one on the bottom. So just real quick, one of the complications you have in consolidation is the property value of the two districts. Is it similar or is it not? Is one of the districts extremely property wealthy and one is extremely property poor, or anything in between that spectrum? That can have significant implications upon the tax impact, your millage rate, upon those who are in the new consolidated district. This bill would have provided a supplemental aid from the state to help level that difference. So if you had District A and District B consolidating, and let's say District A had a mill rate of 15 and District B had a mill rate of 6, and we went somewhere in the middle on that to try to close that disparity, because the district that has the lower mill rate is likely not too excited to consolidate with a district that may have a higher millage rate, of which, even in saying all that, behind the scenes, the Department of Revenue is going to be involved in this as to how things are going to play out with the equalized value of any new school district. This becomes more complicated than simple math, but that bill would have attempted to provide some property tax relief if needed for the district that may have seen potentially a substantial property tax increase due to the differences between the equalized value of those districts. I share this to let you know these conversations are taking place. These were some of these are tied to recommendations that came out of the shared service facility task force study. As the School Board Association, we are generally supportive so long as it keeps local control for you as school boards to determine whether you want to do this or not. There's nothing in these at this time, and it's one that we are very strong in voicing as your association, that if anything's in here that's looking as though it's trying to force the hand, we are going to be we're going to be strongly opposed to it. But these are incentives that are being considered. What's going to happen as they enter the next legislative session after the elections this fall? I would guess these are going to come back up in some fashion. So stay tuned, and that's what we'll be doing also. So, Bob, I don't know if you got anything you want to add to that by chance, but
No, I think that works,
okay.
Ben.
Okay. We're getting very close to wrapping up here and then seeing if we have any other questions. Now, there's a lot of legal considerations. You got to look at your policies. You've got so many pupil issues. You've got pupil records retention and pupil records, handbooks, teacher contracts, administrator contracts, support staff letter of assignments. There are a multitude of things that the school boards and the new school board are going to have to address. Just real quick, without getting into the detail on this, and Bob, if you want to share anything, maybe this is one of the things I just want to bring up. Consolidation it's not one district is joining the other and agreeing to its athletic mascot and colors. You are basically, in a sense, taking both districts, wiping the names and everything out, and starting all over with a brand new district. I had a situation where I had a taxpayer in one of my former districts said, hey, I see the board's thinking about consolidation with the neighboring district. That'd be great if the neighboring district came here. And I started explaining this, and the individual was like, no, they'd come here and they would be our mascot and they'd be our colors. And I said, no, I said, to illustrate it, I said, take the football uniforms and burn them at the 50-yard line. You're starting all over. The consolidated districts have to come up with what that new name is, the new school colors, the mascot, and all of these things that are going to be applicable to the operations of that new school district. So it's not, oh, the smaller one becomes the same as the big one. That's not what consolidation is. It's starting totally over with a brand new school district. And you have to work through all of these matters. So I had this slide up before. These are districts that in more recent times did consolidate. Some of you probably recognize, the Chetek Weyerhaeuser, Shawamigan, somewhat in the Shawamigan most, somewhat in your neck of the woods. And as I shared, Loyal and Greenwood are going to binding referendum July 1st they're going to binding referendum. And let me share what that means this November to see if they would consolidate as of July 1st of 2028. They're on the 18-month timeline, which by statute says you consolidate on the second July 1st after the referendum goes through and the boards would adopt the resolution. School boards have the authority to order consolidation. Bob, from what I know with what they're doing and the other ones, the boards always defer and take it to a binding referendum. But if boards did,
Yeah,
or
not always. I mean, they sometimes wait
some
to see if
have,
there's
huh?
a petition. Yeah, some have not, but yeah,
Okay,
predominantly they do go to the
they do.
referendum.
Okay. But what I was going to get at is if the boards order the consolidation, 10% of the electorate can petition
That is
to
correct.
have it go to a binding referendum. So if the school boards order the consolidation without the referendum, 10% of the electorate does have the authority, in a sense, to challenge the school board's decisions and make it go to a binding referendum. And that's why I was saying, and presuming most, and I was probably with Loyal and Greenwood, they said, the boards there said, no, we're taking it to the voters. This isn't our decision. We're going to take it and just go right to a binding referendum. If not, if I went back to those timelines, there is a process and statute of how long, how many months the electorate has to gather to show proof that there's 10% of them that could go and take that to a binding referendum. So these are the districts that most recently consolidated. And let's just get in the school dissolution, and that was already coming up a bit. So as Bob shared, the state doesn't force dissolution unless you're getting in that situation, not offering grade levels for 2 or more consecutive years. So the local districts actually adopt the resolution to dissolve if that is where they deem their need to go. I think, and Bob, you can correct me just real quick, not trying to exploit or call out Hustisford, but it's all over in the news. They've failed a number of referendums. Their board has made a decision that they are going to consider going to dissolution. I just don't know enough about the full process, and I don't think we know where they're at with like step 2 of that, Bob, if that's a fair
Yeah,
way of.
they've passed their resolution to consider it. Now they're at the spot to decide if they're going to actually vote to do it. They
Dissolve.
have entered into tuition agreements, and all of their students were tuition agreement to the Dodgeland School District, which is a neighbor, and then they have students who have open enrolled out. Interestingly, there were property owners who tried to detach from Hustisford and go to Horicon or Dodgeland or Mayville, for example, and the state appeals board on that denied those petitions since the dissolution process was pending.
Okay,
And
thanks,
the
Bob.
dissolution, the determination though, so if you contrast it with consolidation, the districts control the process the entire way. Once a district votes to dissolve, ultimately the decision to dissolve or not is finally made by the state with the state boundary appeal board.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. So there can be an advisory referendum that you would go through if the board's considering dissolution. What I think I want to do, yeah, this is just, I'm going to go just kind of skip over this. This is just talking about a board of the school boundary appeal board, but I want to get to the definition of what that is. The last district that dissolved was Ondasagan, which is up by Bayfield, Washburn. And that was in 1990. They were the last district that officially dissolved. It was I believe that was a K-12, and it was literally out in the middle of nowhere between Washburn and Bayfield. Now, others that have been on the brink, so I had mentioned I was administrator at Florence County. I didn't live it, I learned it. I came in there about 8 years after they finally passed a referendum not to dissolve, but they were on the brink of going to dissolution. Florence County, one of two countywide school districts, Menominee Indian Nation being the other. There was a lot in that, but ultimately, because it's the 10th biggest district geographically, it's 500 square miles. There were a lot of considerations that I think the voters eventually realized, if we don't have a school district in Florence County, what are we going to have left here? That was really what came to it. There were misconceptions, and one of them with dissolution that, well, our taxes will be lower, or even some, we won't have taxes. I will share this, it's impossible not to have school property taxes in the state of Wisconsin. But actually now Governor Evers, who was assistant superintendent at that time under State Superintendent Libby Burmaster, actually was leading DPI and the messaging up in Florence County to make them well aware that, and I'm going to get to it, the School District Boundary Appeals Board is going to come break this county up. And there was 5 bordering districts that really complicated it, but they eventually passed a referendum, and they've been successful ever since, and they're doing very well, but they do rely on operational referendums. Palmyra Eagle was the most recent. The School District Boundary Appeal Board denied their dissolution. They actually went all the way through and the board filed for dissolution, but the School District Boundary Appeal Board would not let them dissolve because they pretty much said, we don't know that you've explored all your options. And I think there was an immense amount of debt that the other districts were expressing of concern, which doesn't necessarily mean that's going to change. But I think Bob ultimately in that, I think they just felt Palmyra Eagle was a little rushed and needed to take more time in analyzing their situation. That was my takeaway.
That
from
would
it.
be correct. Yeah, that'd be my.
And we talked about who's deferred. They're in the midst of it right now. So who is the School District Boundary Appeals Board? So it's created by the Department of Public Instruction. It's a board that consists of 12 school board members appointed by the state superintendent in staggered 2-year terms. And there are 4 representatives from each small, medium, and large districts. And no more than 1 member may come from each of the 12 CISAs. And when they get into these situations, and Bob, I'm just going through this if you have anything you want to expound upon. When these come before the School District Boundary Appeal Board, they form a 7-member board that consists of 2 reps from each, and either the state superintendent or his or her appointee, which I believe with the Palmyra Eagle one, it was not the state superintendent, it was a designee. Was Dr. Underly state superintendent? Or yeah, that was right when she started, wasn't it, Bob? Or was that still Governor Evers? Anyways, they appointed a designee in that vote. But really what happens is they will come in and they do have public forums, but at the end of the day, their decision is the final decision. So that's where, if you're looking and getting to the point of, as Bob said, with consolidation, you still have the local control to guide what that's going to look like and the ultimate outcome is going to be. But if it gets to dissolution, for the most part, that's gone. They're going to take testimony in that, but at the end of the day, the local school board doesn't have the authority to say, well, to your question, we want this part of the district going here and this part going here. They're going to determine that. So Bob, was that a fair overview for that?
Yeah, I
or
think so.
anything?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. And here's the criteria they are going to consider is, geographical, topographical characteristics, educational needs, programs, adverse effects on programs based on territory. They are going to take, as I said, testimony, written statements, They're going to look at fiscal effects, socioeconomic levels, racial composition of students, and anything else that's deemed appropriate that could be brought up through open testimony to them. But again, at the end of the day, they are the final decision maker. I guess, I don't know if it's fair to say outside of any type of legal challenge, but I'm probably going too far and shouldn't even say that. I mean, they're really the end of the road as to how that district, its assets, its property, the boundaries and those things are going to be broken up and dissolved. And the top of this does say questions for you as a board or administrators, but that's pretty much the overview we are looking to come in and provide tonight. I know it was a lot of content that's probably overwhelming for those of you in the audience too. Hopefully there are some takeaways from it, that nothing in any of it is a real quick snap of the finger, simple and easy. Whether it's whole grade sharing, tuition agreements, shared service agreements, or potentially getting into what we discussed here in the last 20 minutes, half hour, whatever it's been, there's a lot of things to weigh that have to be considered and taken up by you as boards and the administration and the thoughts and insight from your public. So yeah, go ahead.
Maybe on the website or someplace that the people can read this and go back over it.
So I'm going to defer to the superintendents. I think probably yes is the answer, but
And they're accessible. People don't find board docs to be terribly accessible.
but if anything else, reach out at any time as things progress in your conversations in the months and years ahead. If anything, we're here to serve and support you as our members, school boards. And I think that's it. But unless Bob, you have anything in closing you want to share?
No, I don't. Thanks, Ben. Thanks to everybody for allowing us to share some information with you.
All right. Thank you. I'll stick around for a bit too if anybody has anything they want to bring up. So, and I'll
Take
turn
care.
it back over to whoever the presiding board is or how you have this all facilitated. So it looks like Bob signed off. So.
We're gonna close.
What the board open to adjourn? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.